Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Aid, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, he runs the best independent news site in New Zealand, providing journalists to left wing for gainful employment a means to pay the bills. He makes Mark Sainsbury look like, well, Mark Sainsbury, editor of Scoop.co.nz, the ever-brilliant Selwyn Manning, and she is the most powerful female politician of the country. Her hobbies include environmentalism, Westism, and fighting evil. The Deputy Mayor of the Auckland Supercity and high-ranking Jedi Knight, Penny Holtz. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1, it's Quake Week 3 in Christchurch and Quake Week 1 in Japan. How are things being handled and what are the massive ramifications of these joint natural disasters for Auckland? Issue 2, Len Brown's spatial plan versus Rodney Hyde's spatial plan. Since when were trucks, motorways, plus more trucks a vision? Issue 3 tonight, ACT Party conference in Parnell last week. What was more frightening? Judith Collins, Don Brash, or the fact that ACT still thinks it's politically relevant? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with Issue 1. Just as we were getting our head around the Christchurch earthquake, Japan is hit by one of the largest quakes on record, followed by a tsunami, followed by a nuclear reactor disaster. What are the ramifications of our second largest city and fourth largest trading partner being so terribly damaged? Selwyn, let's start with a question to both of you. Was it any surprise that the Rugby World Cup was taken from Christchurch? Any surprise there?
No, it wasn't. And those of us who like to think we subscribe to the common sense fraternity in this country were actually saying that it should not come here right at last week.
Yep.
The nonsense that was coming out of the mouths of the Prime Minister and was appalling, really.
Yep.
You know, this kind of grandiose idea that he was going to bring over ocean liners to park in Littleton Harbour that would then accommodate people from overseas, while you created an us and them type situation where the people of Christchurch living in dolls' houses, tents,
Right.
and in rubble,
Yeah.
is an abhorrence that I just couldn't believe. You know, what this needs is leadership. Where was it? It wasn't there.
Any surprise the Rugby World Cup was being taken off Christchurch?
No, I think we were just, I agree with Selwyn, delaying the inevitable really. I think the worst pass was probably stringing the people of Christchurch along. The issue, I think, is that we still want to see support for the South Island and for the provinces, and
Yeah.
I don't think we've lost perspective on that.
Selwyn, in Japan, 300 kilometres of coastline was hit by the tsunami and estimates of up to 20,000 dead. The cost put it over 300 billion. Is it wrong to focus on the nuclear reactors, or does the radiation add an incalculable element?
No, there's a huge national, state and public interest, a global public interest to this whole event. There's a lot that we can learn here in Auckland, New Zealand, about this whole event too. You know, you only have to look that within academia and within certain sectors of the business community in 2006 through to 2008, there were arguments starting to simmer and getting into the public arena that New Zealand should embrace the new nuclear technologies for power generation.
Who was pushing it?
Well, the surveys were showing that up to 50% of 94% of all, so about half of all businessmen, business people in this country that were surveyed on it agreed for the nuclear option.
Oh, we don't trust businessmen, come on.
94% of them said that the status quo was not yet satisfactory. There was a huge body for that type of area.
Penny, in terms of Christchurch, we are already seeing government suggesting that Auckland infrastructure must be halted for the Christchurch rebuild. Why does it have to be one or t'other? With Christchurch out of action, doesn't Auckland need to do all the economic growth on its own now?
I don't necessarily buy that argument. I'd suggest that we look at what we can free up by way of heavy machinery and people and say, you know, let's do something practical. As far as putting off infrastructure build in Auckland, that's counterintuitive. You know, the country needs to progress to actually make sure the economy progresses and helps Christchurch. I think it's kind of an excuse for, you know, the ongoing debate about whether, you know, the government's actually going to match the Aucklanders spending on infrastructure. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's both, and we just need to get a wee bit real about it.
And what was the advice that that you were given in terms of what we could provide and help for Christchurch?
You'd be amazed at the amount of help in the background that's actually gone down to Christchurch. They seem to be well serviced for, you know, for heavy machinery, for roading machinery that wasn't really needed. It was people power and kind of intellectual grunt by way of, you know, freeing up some of the building inspectors and engineers and that sort of thing. So it was people power and expertise.
Selwyn, with its history of lying about nuclear accidents, do you believe the official line from the Japanese government? Are they simply trying to calm markets that have wiped $700 billion in value off their stock market in the last 3 days?
The most immediate news we've seen coming out of Japan is obviously that this is built into a catastrophic crisis. That most of the fallout at this stage has been going out into the Pacific. That's an abhorrence in its own right. But the whole thing here, it's almost like holding a tiger by the tail. This whole series of events that have been taking on since the tsunami came through on Friday has been giving a clear indication of every reason why these types of technologies are a danger to this world, particularly on the Pacific Rim of Fire. And Bomber, the fact of the matter is that right through the 2000s, but most significantly last year, right on our doorstep in Tonga, the Tongan government, the Tongan king, was actually saying that Tonga would embrace nuclear power to solve its problems. But it's not just Tonga. Over in between Japan and down to the East Cape of Papua New Guinea, right in the middle is a country called Saipan, low-lying island nations. They changed their law only about 6 months ago to be able to have new nuclear technologies on their land. And we've seen Kiribati entering into discussions with United States, smaller modular type of nuclear
how big are they?
How big are they? The size of a refrigerator. So from their point of view, you can see Kiribati, Western Samoa, and Tonga, all in their knees deep in these types of things. This event in Japan, it teaches us
certainly a wake-up call, isn't it?
Imagine those things bobbing around if a big tsunami hits, particularly those low-lying nations like in Kiribati.
That is absolutely incredible. Penny, business owners in Christchurch have said they're angry at the slow response. 17% of the population have left the city. Residents in the eastern suburbs are still suffering. Moving forward, how can Auckland help Christchurch? And also another question, how is Auckland prepared for its own natural disaster?
Starting with that one first, I think what we've learned is that no matter how irritated we might be with our civil defence people, driving around in their little cars and their uniforms, and everyone thinks, a bunch of Boy Scouts, what do? I think we've seen that actually they do very well, internationally recognised for the importance of their work. So as far as the civil defence infrastructure, I think we're well positioned. However, the part that worries me, and it's a constant concern of mine, is with the government's push for centralisation of services, it makes it harder and harder to survive a catastrophic event. So I'm really keen that we use the lessons in Christchurch to push for decentralised infrastructure, water tanks, the ability for people to have septic tanks, be offline from the big services, and the way that Auckland is set up, I think some of that is quite challenging.
But doesn't centralisation actually buy the whole country into being a part of the recovery period?
I mean, it may do. I'm just thinking of the kind of practical, 24, 48, 36 hours later, if you're not subjected to, great big pipes that, one break in the Waikato pipeline and Auckland's down the tubes, one break in the pipe to Mangere and, we're in the poo. So it's, it's saying as we plan for infrastructure over the next 25 years, let's also plan around some resilience to natural disaster at the same time.
Question to both of you, just getting back to Japan. If the worst does occur in Japan and they do get, I'm not even sure how we can sort of calculate what the worst scenario with these reactors are, but let's say there is a large amount of radioactive material that starts to float in a cloud towards Tokyo. How do you evacuate 32 million people?
Well, you can't. It's a small island too. How many aircraft does it take to move 1,000 people? 4.
Right.
So ships, how do you actually get them out of that area in time? It's not like the Soviet Union when Chernobyl blew, that it moved, almost a whole kind of part of its federation into a different area during that time, and we know the ongoing effects. This is an awful situation. There's no positive answer to how you move Tokyo's people out of it.
It's terrifying. I was in Tokyo about 16 months ago. It's almost unfathomable, and I think, maybe they need to start doing something now. The tragedy with this is we haven't learnt from Chernobyl. At the time of Chernobyl, it was the first kind of political act that I got involved in. I read some small obscure piece in the newspaper just after Chernobyl where they said, oh, there's a silver lining for New Zealand. You know, we're bringing all that stock food down here. We're going to feed it to stock because, of course, it's not suitable to be fed to humans. And I sort of rang everyone I could think of and got a question asked in Parliament saying, well, surely stock food passes through the food chain to people, and, you know, so do radioactive isotopes, and we got the consignment stopped. But, you know, it's the wider ramifications of, you know, that nuclear fallout, not just for the people now, but for the wider Pacific.
Thank you, panel. There's no point asking who wins and loses because everyone has lost and no one wins in these disasters. Issue 2. Mayor Len Brown is preparing his draft spatial plan for Auckland to integrate social and economic prosperity with the recreational and cultural well-being of Aucklanders. The government have preempted Len's draft by releasing their own plan, the vision of which is limited to trucks, motorways and more trucks. Selwyn, the government attacks Len's public transport ambitions, yet have no word of criticism for their pointless Puhoi to Wellsford $2.1 billion motorway. Why does National hate public transport but love motorways so much?
Because there's a lot more to be made out of massaging its own stakeholder groups. If you look at the issue of freight, it has had Tony Friedlander, former cabinet minister in the National Party, being a staunch lobbyist for such things for many, many decades now. You know, National looks after its stakeholder groups. If you're going to give it any kind of, you know,
kudos,
pat on the back, it's that it looks after its own, you know.
Right.
And this is a classic case of it, I think.
Penny, in the 15 years from June 1990, Aucklanders contributed $7 billion into central government coffers from fuel tax, road user charges and motor vehicle fees, but got back $3 billion in transport-related expenditure. When is Len going to tell Wellington it's time Auckland stopped having its infrastructure underfunded?
I think we've told Wellington that quite firmly. Wellington, I think, are starting to listen, but one of the more ridiculous issues that have been raised in those cabinet papers is that quite simply by moving the metropolitan urban limit, land will miraculously become cheap and houses will be affordable. The fact that no one will be able to afford to live in them once petrol, you know, goes over $2.50 a litre, that there will be, you know, the cost of energy and water going out to those far-flung suburbs will just recreate all the problems we had in the 70s and 80s. It's nuts.
Especially if we've got trucks lining the motorway and jamming the motorway, so we've got even more economic de-evaluation going on.
Selwyn, the government suggests allowing property development to go ahead without the necessary charges the council uses to levy for community infrastructure costs. Isn't that simply a recipe for urban sprawl?
We've seen urban sprawl as a phenomenon in Auckland, irrespective of what party has been in government in Wellington. I think that it's clearly, you know, I'm a born Aucklander, so I'd say because it's one of the better places in New Zealand, and that's the reason why there's a huge population push. But from the point of view of working out the logistics of trying to actually squeeze the most out of this economy, and let's face it, the country needs the Auckland economy now like it needs the agricultural sector for its commodity export areas. It needs to think of other ways instead of just getting further and further and further away from the common sense approach. Obviously, the people in Wellington have not spent their times on Auckland's roads and highways. We know as soon as even the primary school time, you know, when the kids are getting out of primary school, we've got locked roads here often. They obviously don't know that, or they choose not to actually be affected by it. They need to visit Auckland more often.
Yeah. Penny, Len is hosting a one-day summit of the best minds from Auckland to discuss Auckland's future. I haven't been invited. I'm not sure what the hell that's about. Why is he having a talk fest when he should be fighting with Wellington?
Bomber, your invitation is in the mail. just missed you, sweetheart, as one of the best minds in Auckland. I think you need to have the talking in Auckland. You know, the explaining to people those issues, just as Selwyn was saying. You know, if we don't get the costs apportioned in the right way to develop the right infrastructure, we're going to end up with bad results. The entire debate isn't just around Wellington, it's our own people understanding that. In particular, you know, the issue of developers' contributions, hugely controversial. But unless, you know, the developers pay a fair whack towards the development of those properties, the ratepayers simply pay when we need to retrofit community facilities and infrastructure. So, you know, we need to be having those discussions as well. Also, we need some bright ideas from some great thinking Aucklanders, and that's what it's about.
What are you hoping to get out of this?
I think probably a couple of things. Number one, get the spatial plan, the draft discussion document out on the table so that people can have a look. Number two, take the flack, take the good ideas, take the, the things that people don't like. That's going to then form up the actual draft discussion document. So this is a really preliminary stage, but we want to hear from all of the sectors of Auckland. We need their input.
What do you think comes out of this?
Well, I see it from a political strategy point of view. That for a long time we've seen that Wellington has taken advantage of Auckland's fragmented political environment. Here is an opportunity of inclusiveness, of engagement that can, even if it's an impression, it's important in politics. That there is a solid base of a population that is actually parochial as much as what Christchurch was, that is forming into a new political movement up here in Auckland, that has wrapped itself around its elected, chosen councillors and mayor, and it's actually saying to Wellington, this is what we want. It is now up to you as the recipients of our tax take to deliver on these things. And it's strategic, and one would hope that the strategy would be used in such terms.
Does the government spatial plan suggest, however, that they don't get it?
I think the government spatial plan is a list of disparate papers that are completely unconnected to reality. I don't think that whoever wrote those papers has any idea of how Auckland works, has any idea of 21st century urban planning, or has read a single academic paper on climate change, peak oil, or any of those issues that other cities around the world are just incorporating into their planning as if it was, unquestionable.
Who wins, who loses with these spatial plans?
It's hard because it's a future question, really. I think that all the ingredients are there for an Auckland win on this, and I do see it as an Auckland issue. It's for the betterment of the region, the betterment of the population, the betterment of the country from an economic point of view. It's got to be a win, or it's a huge loss to everybody, no matter what region they live in around this country.
If Auckland fails, the country fails, right?
We know, the labels like Jaffa and all of these other things, and that's all fine. I don't think anyone really gives a toss about that too much. The fact of the matter is we're all New Zealanders. In Auckland, we need the agricultural sector to be performing. The agriculture in the provinces and every other country, every other city and town in New Zealand needs Auckland to be as efficient as it possibly can. That's where the cooperation has got to come from.
Who wins, who loses with the spatial plan?
New Zealand wins if we do it well, because we're competing against other cities around the world. This is not within New Zealand. The environment and the community lose if we get it wrong and if we're not brave.
Thank you, panel. Coming up, ACT hold their conference in the cheap part of Parnell. What was more frightening, Judith Collins, Don Brash, or the fact Rodney still thinks he's politically relevant? Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A, reviewing the week with Scoop editor Selwyn Manning and deputy editor of the Auckland Super City, Penny Hulse. Issue 3 this week. ACT held their conference in Parnell last week, trying to tell everyone who would listen that they are still politically relevant. Judith Collins turned out to scare children and promote public floggings. Don Brash made barely veiled racist comments. And Rodney Hyde said he wanted to open pit mine conservation land. Selwyn, why isn't ACT getting popular support? Is it the shoot the natives jokes? Is it the hypocrisy of David Garrett? Is it the hypocrisy of Sensible Sentencing Trust? Is it the hypocrisy of Rodney Hyde? Is it the sexist bullying of Heather Roy? Is it the threatening to resign over the Māori Super City seats? Is it the ramming through of the Super City without consultation? Is it the Māori appointees that will cost millions? Which one?
I feel punch drunk after all that.
Yeah. There's a lot going, isn't there? There's a lot going on.
Let's face it. The ACT Party is actually hardly registering really when it's there. It all comes down to, hardly anyone really supports it. It's the one that's punching above its weight. And it's doing so because Rodney Hyde and a few others in his party have become like the political version of radio shock jocks.
He's the Rock FM of the political world.
Picks up any issue that they know is going to shock it, the most extreme version of a particular issue. They know that then, even though they're way down in the polls, they will get on the news. and they'll get noticed, and then they'll be able to say to their stakeholder groups, their supporters, their members, even though they're not that many in number, that we're out there and we're significant. The frightening thing is, Bomber, is they are significant until the good people of this country put their thing to the vote in November.
But the intellectually pure amongst them, and there are some purists, I mean, I bump into ex-party people who really do believe in the liberal ideology, and they take it that way. They hate this crap. I mean, there's a lot of anger towards Hyde internally within his own party, isn't
there? But every one of them will be smiling if that shock mentality actually ended up with a higher percentage of votes in the polls leading up to the election campaign.
Roger didn't like it.
Well,
he's
Roger's an old man and he's gone.
Yep.
You know, so he's yesterday's news in many respects.
Penny, Rodney says open pit mines are a tourism attraction, yet on his 2009 $20,000 taxpayer-funded trip around the world with his girlfriend, he didn't visit one open pit mine. Do you think Auckland needs an open pit mine to attract tourism dollars? What are your thoughts?
I stopped listening after I heard him say that he thought open cast mining was majestic. And I thought, what is this man on? What is he smoking? You know, I grew up in South Africa. I spent a lot of time in Johannesburg. Open cast mining is not majestic. It's utterly rape and pillage of the landscape. And I think we should move on to the next topic. The man is a waste of time.
But in terms of Auckland's clean green, in terms of New Zealand's clean green brand, I mean, does this stuff detract or benefit for us?
I think, you know, the outside world will be watching, if anyone ever does watch what Rodney Hyde says, and just wondering how on earth we could elect someone with those views. I've just come back from South Africa, where the mining debate is kind of raging at the moment, because the ANC, quite rightly, have changed the way mining licences are granted, so you don't have to be Anglo-Val or De Beers or one of the big three, and they've allowed individuals to take out mining licences, which people are delighted about, and they're camping on each other's property and taking out mining licence over neighbourless properties. There's some modicum of control by local government, but the issues that raises for a fragile environment are huge, you know. And do we need to create wealth by simply digging it out of the ground here? I don't know. You know, we've got some areas we can justify some of the coal mining, but do we need to, you know, increase mining on conservation estate? I think that's completely nuts. Would you be happy to see Great Barrier? No, absolutely not. I'm heading off there the week after next, and if I want to keep myself intact, absolutely not. But you fly over that is worth millions of dollars. You know, helicopter cruise ship people over that. You will treble the amount of value out of that ecosystem rather than just, you know, hoarding the top off it and mining it. It's just crazy.
Selwyn, will the growing fear that Rodney won't win Epsom mean National will run a real candidate in Epsom? And how could a new right party impact everything there?
I think with Epsom, the National Party will put in a serious candidate and a serious effort to try and win it as soon as it believes it is well above the threshold which would indicate that it could govern alone.
Okay, so if they think they're going to get over 47%, Rodney's out.
If it thinks that it's going to be delicate, that it needs 2 MPs for the price of 1, it will do everything in its power to massage Rodney back in. So that ACT comes in perhaps with 2 MPs instead of National Party candidate winning it and coming in with only 1. It seems at the moment, and we talked off air, Bomber, and I agree with you that it does not look like National will be able to win and outright.
Right.
So that would suggest, logic would suggest from a strategic point of view, it will do everything it can to allow Rodney to win while making sure National still has a presence in that electorate.
Right.
But remember, it's the people in that electorate that actually determine this, not the strategists in Wellington.
That's right. And it's interesting to note, isn't it, that in terms of the party vote, the Greens got a higher party vote than ACT did. In Epsom. So this mining bizarre.
Well, that's where the blue-green vote probably comes in.
Right.
And we can see that a little bit in the way that the Green Party positions.
Right.
Particularly up here in Auckland, and you probably noticed in West Auckland those kind of movements.
So this sudden leap into open cast mining could actually be quite detrimental to his own Epsom standing.
Well, it could, but it might also indicate that he's very confident. I mean, let's say, you know, we're right on the back of the Pike River mine disaster here. What a joke! What a cheek the man has to actually raise this kind of thing up. You know, I know open cast mining is different to what was happening in Pike. Maybe that's the logic he's trying to actually get out there, but he didn't communicate it. It was just kind of inappropriate nonsense, really.
Some say, when I say some, I mean me, that professional women in Epsom would have experienced sexist male bullies in their working life, and after watching what Rodney did to Heather Roy, would have attached that experience directly to Rodney and would now prefer to be caught shopping at Farmers by their Remuera Tennis Club girlfriends than vote for a sexist bully boss. As a professional woman, do you think female voters respond well to such revelations?
Hopefully Dancing with the Stars is far enough in the background that, you know, whatever got him across the line last time with some women voters is no longer relevant. I can't imagine a single thinking woman voting for Rodney Hyde. It just seems, you know, unimaginable. He will, I guess, reconnect with his charming self, but you know, we just have to remind people of the real Rodney Hyde, and he is an exceedingly challenging candidate. I have offered to pamphlet for John Banks if he's keen to stand in the area, and it couldn't get more passionate than that.
Is ACT a positive influence for Auckland?
No.
Is ACT a positive influence for Auckland?
No, I don't believe so. I think it's actually exploited that particular electorate. That when Christine Fletcher bowed out of that electorate, she handed over perhaps to her, you know, replacement quite a sizable network with its local communities. It was very deep. Within the course of one term, we saw that eroded where there was hardly any network left. Rodney Hyde realised that, went in and actually exploited it. I don't think it's good for Auckland at all.
Who wins, who loses from the ACT Party conference? Don Brash did a pretty good job, didn't he?
I can't imagine anyone winning at an ACT Party conference.
Who wins, who loses the ACT Party conference?
Or maybe Don Brash did.
It was a boost for Parnell's economy, surely.
He got his name out there again. He must make him feel better at night.
Let's wrap the show with last word. Selwyn, your last word this week is?
My last word is let's look at those big issues that are happening around the place at the moment. The Christchurch thing shows that New Zealand sits on a very delicate kind of line here on the Pacific Rim of Fire. We can see Japan's problems there. Let's really embrace common sense, learn from the tragedy of others, and actually plan for the future that is based on common sense. Don't let our Pacific neighbours, in a sense, go without a debate on issues like nuclear energy proliferation and things like that. That I just think it's the biggest issue that we're looking at.
Penny, your final word this week is?
Similar thing. I think we have such huge lessons to learn by Christchurch and Japan. But the most important thing is that we simply need to be a little bit brave in the way we plan for the future, and we can't condemn our communities to sort of relive those problems that they've had with, you know, liquefaction and inundation and flooding. And whilst what's happening is almost unthinkably awful, you know, something positive has to come out of it, which is a slightly more sustainable future for us.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you, Penny. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. I think that arresting and charging cancer patients for growing their own marijuana they use for pain relief is as counterproductive as making Charlie Sheen your life coach. Peter Davey, who has cancer, has been charged with cultivating marijuana in Timaru. He also provides 24-hour care to his wife, who suffers from advanced multiple sclerosis. Why we are pointlessly wasting court time with medical marijuana cases simply highlights the injustice and prohibition of a substance that does nowhere near the social damage tobacco or alcohol does. Cancer patients shouldn't be arrested for growing a substance far less lethal than booze and ciggies. It's bullshit. You know it, I know it. The only ones who don't seem to know it are the police and the politicians, which is funny as they seem to be the ones in desperate need of a joint. Chill out. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.